This is No Better with your host, Kipper Jones.
Good evening, everybody. This is No Better. I am Kipper Jones, your host, and we are here tonight to kind of recap the recent Georgia primary election that we just had here in the state. And as you may know, there are two states that I believe that are having primary elections today: New York and Kentucky. Um, Kentucky is one of the states, much like Georgia, who's had some very interesting things to go on in terms of their preparation for the election and in terms of their execution. There were many precincts closed in Kentucky. As a matter of fact, I don't know how, but they had over 600,000 people directed to one precinct. This is um, nothing short of voter suppression. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. That is what it is. But that said, Georgia's had our own series of calamities in terms of our voting procedure. We had new voting machines this year that weren't tested accurately, that weren't displayed or executed in any other election until this primary election. And then to top it all off, we're in the COVID environment where people are, at the very least, afraid to go out and be with other people, and just being extra cautious. So we've had a number of setbacks in terms of, or a number of obstacles in terms of being able to execute a great voting process. And then we've had our own share of poll closures, precinct closures, poll workers not showing up for work because of the COVID environment. So there's been a number of reasons why. But even to that point, there have been some very interesting things to go in and voting counts for the votes that did turn out. And so to help us talk about that and speak to that this evening, we have Keisha Waits, who is a candidate for the 13th Congressional District, yes, in the state of Georgia. And so welcome, Ms. Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for being here. So your race was quite interesting. I kind of know a little about it because we've talked in terms of setting up the show for this evening. But would you like to kind of tell the audience kind of more in detail kind of where that stands right now and what's going on with that?
Well, in short, the primary here in Georgia was held on June 9th on a Tuesday evening. There was some delay in terms of certifying the election because of a number of issues, the enormous magnitude of absentee ballots that each county received certainly delayed the process. And then there were certain challenges specific to Fulton County. For this reason, myself and other candidates made the decision to file a petition to delay the certification to allow ample time for an investigation and so that the ballots could be adequately counted. And when I say ballots, I'm specifically referring to absentee ballots. Mm-hmm. Right now, Devin says he's waiting in the room. So I don't know if you need to know that. But at any rate, story short, we filed a petition. The judge did not move on that petition. He felt that given the issues that I raised, that I should probably file an election contest, which I'm not contesting the election. As I've sent you documentation, what we're simply saying is that by the elections chief own admission, there are about 48,000 ballots that were not counted because the voter did not mark in the oval box. And for that reason, those ballots were not counted. And I am in a situation whereas I'm in a 2 to 3% vote margin, which would allow me to be eligible for a runoff election. Mm-hmm. And so right now that matter is still within the court.
I've heard from several people about dropping off absentee ballots at drop boxes that weren't collected or weren't counted, and things of that nature. So when you say 48,000 ballots that weren't counted. I mean, how does that even jive? I don't understand that. I mean, you can't certify
So
an election if you don't have all the votes counted. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
so right. So there are three mechanisms for voting. So I want to clear up early advance voting. You go before June 9th to place your vote, where you do this in an in-person format. And then you have the capacity to request an absentee ballot, which will be mailed to your home. You can return that two ways. You can mail that back in, or they gave you the opportunity to put that in a Dropbox. And actually, there's a third way. If you want to just come on in and surrender the ballot, you can actually vote during the early advance process or even on election day. So those were some opportunities available. It is my understanding, talking with numerous voters and or constituents and candidates, that many of the Dropbox locations were locked. They were not accessible. And a number of candidates, whatever, did not receive the absentee ballot until after the election was held.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, my brother got his ballot right before the election. He and his girlfriend had filed their applications back in April, and she never got hers. I mean, they're in the same house, same address. I don't understand what what that means, why that happens. And that's all run by the Secretary of State's office. Am I correct?
Okay. So the Secretary of State office is the administrator for the state. Each county has a superintendent and an elections board that carries out the election. And it is my understanding that the Secretary of State is to ensure that they have the resources necessary to hold the election. Based on the meetings that I sent you, the online meetings that took place, one of the things that was said during my court proceedings or hearings was that Fulton County repeatedly indicated that they had the resources necessary to move forward. However, based on what happened on election day, as well as a number of the things that have happened, I think that is not true. Right now, it appears that 143,000 individuals requested an absentee ballot in Fulton County. The number of individuals that turned the ballot in remains to be, we don't know the answer to that because I was seeking that information in an emergency injunction. And as I said to you, there are $48,000 by the election chief, Rick Barron's own admission that these ballots were irregular or ineligible because a couple things happened. They didn't sign the ballot, was missing some information, or they did not mark in the oval, meaning they could have put a check box, they could have circled it or marked outside of the box. And according to the law, these ballots should stand, but they have to be individually read. And so given the magnitude and the sheer magnitude of votes that came in, Fulton County did not have the staff to do so. And so it is our contention that there's still some 48,000 ballots out there because they could not be scanned in because they did not check perfectly in the oval, that these are votes that are still out there. And that is my argument before the court.
Got it. So, I mean, what could any, I don't know, recompense? I mean, how can they make up for this gigantic faux pas?
Well, I don't know if this is something that you can make up for because the reality of holding another election, Fulton County indicated that they spent $16 million holding the election. So the likelihood of them holding another election, I don't support that as a taxpayer and as a homeowner. However, what they can do is for those 48,000 ballots that are in question is to bring in an independent person and or agency and to hand count the remaining ballots. And what does that do? For races that were close in the 50% margin, there was a U.S. Senate race in question. My race was in question, and a number of races that went into runoffs that will settle the question as to who those 48,000 votes actually belong to.
So, which brings me to the Fulton County Office of Registration and Election demands that you and a couple of other of our leaders in the community actually went before the board, right, with these list of demands to change or improve this system. I mean, because from what I understand, the state is seeking to take over the elections board now. Is that correct?
It's my understanding that Senator John Albers currently has legislation before the General Assembly to do this. And as you're aware, they're in the process of winding down. They have about a couple of days. In fact, kudos to them for passing the hate crimes legislation today. So those pieces of legislation are moving very quickly. It is a local bill, so it doesn't have the same hurdles that a general piece of legislation has, which has to clear the entire state. It's a local piece of legislation. And so for that reason, there's a timeline, and I can't say whether or not I support the state taking over Fulton County's elections board or not, because the state itself, when you look at our challenges statewide, they were no better. So I'm not necessarily in favor of the state taking over. I am simply indicating that an independent agency other than Fulton County needs to be in charge of oversight and monitoring.
Indeed. I think it's obvious that our state has had numerous occasions to be pointed at in terms of their own voting irregularities, shall we say. So I totally agree with you. I mean, if there were going to be any sort of outside improvements made, I would be much in favor of an independent agency to handle that. So how would that work? Would anything be able to get done? Because we have August is our runoffs, right? So could anything be done between now and August to improve on this system that just obviously fell apart? I mean, we had these unrealistically long lines, and like I said, these precinct closures, all these kinds of things. And I know that's a statewide situation. That's not just Fulton County. But can anything be done with these irregularities that we're speaking of before even the runoffs happen in August? We have just a couple of months.
Well, frankly, we have less than a couple of months. You know, with June 9th, that would have given us about 8 weeks. And so now, today is the 23rd. Yeah. So certainly the clock is running very quickly. But a couple of things I would say. By the Secretary of State's own admission, he indicated that 70% of the state's challenges in terms of voter irregularities and or problems came from Fulton County. I think that's quite telling. On my hearing, there were 3 individuals who gave one testimony, and in the judge's order, he pretty much indicates, yeah, you pretty much proved your case. However, because I did not serve the state elections board director, that was one of the reasons for my denial. We served the Fulton County board chair. We served the Fulton County board. We served the state. And I didn't know. And of course, we served other entities who were involved in this case. And so, you know, one of the things that I have found when you look at these election challenges, because there are 4 lawsuits currently out there, it's my understanding that Fulton County Commissioner Joe Carn filed a suit. Several nonprofits have filed lawsuits. The Democratic Party, in fact, filed a lawsuit. One of the things that I will tell you that I found most disappointing is the fact that I took the time to actually reach out to the NAACP, and they indicated that they would not be available to testify. And so I tend to question the sincerity regarding the Democratic Party's desire to ensure that all voters had their voices heard. And I say this because there is some concern that, from my understanding, from what I am told, that they do not want to see the candidate John Ossoff go into a runoff. And so for that reason, they're willing to sacrifice the entire down ballot ticket to not address the irregularities that took place around the state, as well as in Fulton County, in hopes that they will defeat Senator David Perdue in November. And the reason why I find it particularly disturbing is because you have millions of voters that have been disenfranchised. It is the Democratic Party's job to ensure that every voice is heard and that every vote is counted. And to simply ask for 3 days to allow folks to correct ballot errors when you know that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of ballots out there that have not been calculated, in addition to the fact that the software is known to not properly tabulate through the scanners, this is a problem. In fact, there's another lawsuit pending surrounding this issue. So, Kipper, there are so many different challenges, and I just sent you a very short list of some of the things that I noted during the Fulton County Board elections update.
And And to your point, this short list is pages long. Um, I, um, I'm just astounded. First of all, I must say I'm a bit disappointed in the Democratic Party's response to the Democratic Committee's response to your request, and more so even at the NAACP's response to your request, that they wouldn't offer you the support in your request. I am astounded by that. I got to admit. Also, let me just introduce while he's here, Devin, Mr. Devin Barrington Ward, who was also a state Senate candidate in our primary election that just happened. Devin, are you there?
I'm here.
You are here. Hey, good to see you. Good to see you, and thank you for joining us. And I know that you were also part of the elections demand situation. So would you like to speak to that as well?
Yes. We took our demand straight to Fulton County because they are the entity that is responsible for funding elections moving forward. And so while we commend the efforts of Representative Waits and Linda Pritchett at taking the legal course of action and having it adjudicated and on the record in a court. I also think it's really important that moving forward, we have some reforms that reflect what happened on the last primary, which was a lack of innovation, a lack of oversight, a lack of appropriate training. People didn't know what they were doing. There wasn't enough resources, a lack of customer service. I mean, something as simple as just making sure that people aren't standing in the rain. And if they are going to stand in a line and wait in the rain, that at least they have ponchos or a tent or something. And so it was just the need to really, one, start at the top. So that means going to Fulton County, who's the entity that's responsible for funding the elections division, but also starting at the top in terms of advocating for the reform, which starts with a new elections director and the replacement of our current elections director, because he has mismanaged elections before. This is not the first time Fulton County voters have been disappointed with the way that our elections have, kind of played out over the last few years. We're nationally known that you're going to get results from Georgia absolutely last because of Fulton County, because Fulton County is going to keep the nation waiting. And in this upcoming election in November, this is not a time where we can play those type of games. People not receiving mail-in ballots during a pandemic when we're encouraging people to stay home, when we're now hearing all of the experts saying that we can anticipate some sort of second wave coming in the fall that's going to coincide right with elections. We don't have time for mismanagement and nefarious intentions at the top with the state, and then having that also reflected in Fulton County, a county that is racially diverse. We should be leading the state as far as how elections are done, and making sure that people can access the ballot box in a way that makes sense, particularly given that we're in 2020 and not 1920.
Yeah, amen. And to add to your point, I think there's also a lack of accountability.
Absolutely.
You see so much passing the buck. No one wants to be responsible.
Yep.
And it's a lot of finger pointing and that kind of thing. So, with this list of demands, and I see some some of these things are, I don't know, for me, seem to be kind of common sense things that seem like revolutionarily innovative, though in this circumstance. But like making sample ballots available to print with links to the websites of candidates 1 week after qualification day.
Absolutely.
I think that makes all the sense in the world. We used to, in my family, when I lived in California, we would get together and have what we called voting parties. And we would sit and we would go through each candidate and each issue and talk about who thought what about what and that kind of thing. And when you have that kind of time between qualification and election day, then you can do those sorts of things.
Right.
So I think that's a great idea. But again, I'm big on accountability. How do we get people to own their stuff? I mean, really, because that's kind of where we are with this. There's just so much buck passing. And even with Keisha's situation, I mean, she went through all the steps, and then at the last minute they say, oh, but you didn't send it to this person, or and that kind of thing. And it's just, I don't know, it's a little stunning and a little baffling to me. So Keisha, as well, like you were saying, you followed all the steps of recourse. So what, I don't know, I mean, how do you, I mean, we know we put these plans into place and how to fix it for the next time, but in the meantime, it's like, what do you think? I don't know, is there like maybe an advisory committee or something that candidates should have to follow or go through to be able to know these things in the event that it happens again? Have I lost your sound? Yeah.
Okay, is that okay now?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. So one, I think that the work that Mr. Ward, including Mr. Johnson, Rafer, and Devin joining us at the Board of Commissioners meeting to make our voices heard during public comments, I think is important. The biggest challenge that I see is of the 48,000 individuals who are impacted by this conversation, many of them have no idea that this is even going on. They have no idea that their votes have not been counted. So that's one challenge. It's my understanding that Commissioner Lott Pitts has established an elections task force. However, I've heard in the last couple of days that he sees no need to remove the elections chief nor the board. So when you rubber stamp the individuals that created the debacle, that to me signals very clearly that the task force is nothing more than the same thing. The reality is, and I understand his point, is that you don't change pilots when you're in air. But if the pilot has demonstrated a level of negligence, if the pilot has shown you that he is not trained, if the pilot is visually impaired, if the pilot is drunk, I think we some of this and I look at some of the issues that came up during my hearing, some of the things Mr. Johnson raised. Some of these are so egregious, I didn't even know folks were voting at 2:25 a.m. in the morning. And to me, that should be nothing more than voter suppression. And to me, folks should be raising hell about this. Yeah. Devin mentioned too, Kipper, tonight, that the NAACP, Fair Fight, as well as the Democratic Party were invited to testify during my hearing, and each declined. And so the institution works to protect itself. And for the most part, from what I am hearing, this is about ensuring that Jon Ossoff does not go into a runoff and that he is able to take on David Perdue in November. So they're willing to sacrifice the entire ballot for these 48,000 votes.
So how would that affect the Ossoff campaign? I'm unclear on that. I mean, I understand the Democrats wanting for him to be just one solid candidate and there'll be no runoff, and got that. But how does, like, say, for instance, your race, which is a congressional race and not a Senate race, how does that affect his? Is it because it's just one ballot altogether? Is that?
I'm happy to explain it, and Mr. Ward can chime in as he wishes. Essentially, the Ossoff race played out the same way. On election night, if you notice, Ossoff was pretty much hovering around 48%, which meant that he was not at the 50% margin to avoid a runoff. However, mysteriously, when we all woke up the next day, he somehow spiked to around 52, 53%, as did the current seat holder in 13, David Scott. So what's interesting is that when you look at these numbers for early advance voting and for election day voting, they trended one way. However, when we got behind closed doors and looked at the absentee ballots, for some reason, these numbers spiked and went through the roof. And I am saying to you, given that Fulton County is the largest county in the state of Georgia, certainly 48,000 will have a tremendous impact on the U.S. Senate race in terms of determining whether Mr. Ossoff is in a runoff and whether he is not within a runoff. And, I had many friends in that race. So, I didn't necessarily have a horse in that race. I was supportive of the ticket, and whoever surfaced is who I would like to have, seen successful. But it appears, given the financial resources, that the party's position is in the best position to take on David Perdue in November.
Yeah, understood. That's interesting. That is totally interesting. But are you still there? I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I think he may have stepped away from him. Oh, there you are, sir. I'm so sorry. So in your race, did you notice any sort of activity as well that was resembling of these other irregularities that kind of went on? Did you notice any of that?
The biggest irregularity was that there were many residents who requested absentee ballot request forms that never received them, that never received the ballot. And so that was the common theme and thread throughout my race, was that there were many folks who requested ballots from Fulton County, from the state, and they didn't receive them. And so that was more common than not. And so the idea that, we were supposed to be relying on mail-in voting during, again, this time of this pandemic, and that system completely failed, was not successful at all in a major election is concerning.
What would you suggest? I mean, other than we have this list of recommendations, and I get that. But what would you suggest, like you said, in this pandemic, in this unprecedented environment, what would you suggest happen to be able to ensure at least some semblance of a justified, legitimate election come November?
I mean, I think those, a lot of times we're trying to pick and prod and find a list of a million different things. And I actually don't think it requires any of those things. Those recommendations that are outlined and that we shared with Fulton County are 12 solid recommendations that I believe, if implemented, can assure that people are able to access the ballot box in a way that makes sense, in a way that's effective, in a way that's innovative. And so I really lean back on those recommendations before we start trying to look for other reforms. I think those recommendations really speak to the issues in which we saw on how our election system in Fulton County completely obliterated.
This is it's just baffling to me that something as simple as going to cast a vote and having your vote counted, it turns out to be this overly complicated mishmash of events. So we noticed today in Kentucky, there was this situation where there was an inordinate amount of poll closures, precinct closures.
Correct.
And people were directed to like one precinct, I think in Louisville, where you're talking about 600,000 registered voters are directed to one place. And as I mentioned in earlier conversation with Ms. Waits, that we have our own poll closure issues here.
Absolutely.
And redirecting. How do you contest that? Is there a way? Is that just an arbitrary move on the part of the Secretary of State that we're just not going to have these polls open? And I know we had a lot of people checked out because of the COVID situation and that kind of thing. But I mean, how do you contest, like, no, we're going to have these polls open? I mean, if it's about the people, do the people have a vote?
Well, I think it starts with, in Fulton County, it starts with having an election director that can champion those type of remedies for Fulton County voters. And so we have there are multiple hands that are involved with the facilitation of our elections. Yes, some of it relies on the Secretary of State, but a lot of it also relies on your local elections division. And so again, that is why I'm supportive of the removal of our current elections director and moving in a different direction. Because I also believe that when you have a different elections director and a board that's clear about what their mandate is on behalf of Fulton County and its residents as far as elections are concerned, then you would not have precinct plans that would further inflame wait times, because they would recognize that they're there in service of Fulton County residents who have made it very clear that they don't want to stand in these type of lines before a pandemic, and definitely not during a pandemic. So again, I redirect everybody back to those 12 recommendations, and also strengthening the leadership at the local level as far as our elections are concerned. Because right now we have the Secretary of State that we have, right? Unless there is going to be a recall effort to recall the Secretary of State, which will require lots of resources and a political appetite from some very large players in the state. At this moment, I think what is more obtainable is making sure that we pressure the Fulton County commissioners, as well as the elections board of directors for the elections, to move into a different direction locally, because that is more in our control at this moment.
Is that a ballot initiative to have to replace the elections director? How does
No,
that?
that's the decision that can be made by the current elections board. So right now, the way that the elections board in Fulton County is made up, there's 2 representatives from the Republican Party of Fulton County. There are 2 representatives from the Democratic Party, and the chair of the board is appointed by the Board of Commissioners. And so one of the things that people have talked about is that there is no mechanism for the Board of Commissioners to fire the elections director. However, they have the power of the purse strings. They do fund the elections division. In addition to that, they can vote on a resolution that could issue a vote of no confidence in the current elections director, and they can remove their current appointee to the elections board of directors. So they have some influence, and they can use their political capital to pressure the elections director out, and to usher in some new leadership at that board.
Okay, so forgive me, but you said there are 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and then the director is the
No, the chair of the board is
of the board.
appointed by the Fulton County Commissioners.
I see. So is the chair of the board a partisan position?
That person is, I'm not sure if they're Democrat or Republican, but they're voted on by the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, and they're appointed to serve as the chair.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I ask is just, I don't know, maybe a little obvious, but it would kind of lend itself to how the board would swing if there were 2 of each on each side. So I was
right. Well, I will say that Rob Pitts has historically sided with North Fulton commissioners, and so there's a chance that that person, depending upon when they were appointed, was appointed with the influence of the North Fulton vote, sided with Rob Pitts, because he does not always side with the commissioners that represent the majority of the city of Atlanta and South Fulton.
Got it. So, Ms. Waits, so where does your situation stand at this point?
Well, I wouldn't call it my situation. I would say that, again, 1.5 million voters are impacted by these conversations.
Yes.
There are 48,000 absentee ballots that we know have not been accounted for. So I think the situation is a bit larger than myself. Devin can attest to the fact that I've been around for a while. And so I'm a big girl and I understand the process. I think with this election, in fact, I just read online, Chris Harvey, the state elections board director, for some reason now he feels that this election is unlike no other. However, in our hearing, he downplayed a lot of the things raised. And so the reality is that November is around the corner. And even though this was a primary and each party somehow feels, at least from what I am seeing politically, that they walked away unscathed, the reality is the repercussions in November will be a huge price. We have seen the results of having incompetence in the White House. We've seen the results of having a thoughtless leader in the White House. And so the stakes are too high to have these types of, the type of negligence that we have seen. And so when I say to you, this is not my problem, this conversation is a lot broader than myself. Certainly I have been impacted. I have spent the last 120 days on the campaign trail. But I think that's a small price to pay when you look at another 4 years. The fact that we could continue to have the type of leadership that we've seen in the last 4 years at the state as well as the federal level, if that's not frightening to you, then certainly COVID-19 is nothing.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. I'm almost at a loss for words. Like I said, I'm really baffled at the fact that we can't get something as simple as an election, as a voting process, to be as simple as it is, and it seems so complicated. I've had some conversations with people like, well, you can pay your bills online, and you can apply for school online, and you can do everything online. And I mean, how come we don't have a process where we can even vote online? And and then you get a lot of humming and hawing about, well, because it's easy to interfere with and all of that kind of stuff. Well, here you have a paper ballot, absentee ballot system that is not easy to interfere with, that they've somehow found a way to interfere with. So I'm just astounded by it all. I really, I'm at a loss for words. What is one thing that I don't see, and Devin, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 12-point plan, is I know with the police situation now, we're talking about we have in Atlanta a citizens review board. And I don't think a lot of cities do, but that's one thing that I'm so glad that happens in Atlanta. It helps with, again, that word, with accountability. Is there any sort of plan to put in place like an elections review board or an elections review committee or something to that effect?
The board of directors for the elections, if operating as they should, is supposed to serve as that entity. And so one of the things that we do need to caution is not creating additional reviews for processes that don't need additional review. What it needs is for the process to work. And so I'm hesitant around seeing another review board. I think with policing, it's something very different because we're reviewing police conduct and action for entities that are responsible for providing public safety in community that oftentimes are not doing that. And so that does require additional level of review because it oftentimes is interpersonal conflict. This is not that. This is an election that is not something that happens every day. That is why the mismanagement of this key government function is inexcusable, because when we look at all of the other government agencies that are supposed to provide services to folks, they have to provide those services every day. Firefighters have to show up every day to be a firefighter. People who do public works and repair our roads have to do that every day. People who run the library system do that every day. Elections don't happen every day. There's literally maybe 3 to 4 elections, if that, in a year, right? Yeah. And if it's an off election year, it's less than that. And so the idea that we need to create an additional review, I don't believe that that is what is needed. I believe what is needed is for the systems in place that we have to work appropriately.
Would you agree that with with the Voting Rights Act being stripped, with the voter suppression efforts that we see in states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and then there being no accountability with the Voting Rights Act being stripped, like I said, that there has to be some sort of oversight.
Maybe in other places, but I feel like in a county where the majority of the population is Black, we are not a minority here. We are not a disempowered people. If this is Fulton County, this is where, as Mr. Pitts would say, Fulton County is where great things happen. And that is because it is a city that is not a county that is not, at a lack of racial diversity. It is a county where it is common to see Black people in leadership. And so while maybe some of those efforts need to exist at the state level and at the federal level, I just believe that the residents of Fulton County need to be empowered enough to recognize where they have the power to have these systems work appropriately. So I would be open to those additional type of reviews happening at the state level. Certainly, if some of those aspects of the Voting Rights Act were in place, we may not have seen the type of mismanagement and voter suppression that took place in 2018. But as we're talking about something as simple as, at the local level, Fulton County, a county where you have 4 Black commissioners, a county where it is common to see Black people in leadership, a county where it is common to see Black people influencing the political process, it is inexcusable that we need additional review at the local level. We need what our systems to work the way that they're supposed to, so that we can use those efforts to fight the injustices and the mismanagement at the state and federal level. There's only 24 hours in a day. And so oftentimes we have to figure out where is our best efforts to pick and choose our battles. Where do we create additional systems and new systems? And where do we hunker down and say, actually, we don't need to create something new here. We need to just make what is in place work the way it's supposed to. And that's why I believe those reforms are important at the local level, because I believe that the issues at the state level are way more systemic. The issues at the federal level are way more systemic as it pertains to elections. But what's happening with Fulton County, it's less nefarious than it is just pure just mismanagement and a lack of competency. In order for it to be nefarious, it would have to show some level of sophistication. I haven't seen any level of sophistication from the Fulton County's elections division to even lean on the side that it's some sort of nefarious conspiracy, that it's just a lack of not caring, a lack of competency, and a commitment to mismanagement.
I hear you full well. So like I said, your 12-point plan here, number 12 is everything for me. I said start the process to implement online voting within 5 years. I truly think, especially in terms of where our younger voters are going, our younger voters spend a lot of time even just working online. It's not even as much as the social media aspect of it. I mean, a lot of what they do is tech driven and that kind of thing. So I would really love to see that happen. Is that something that can be, I don't know, legislated in terms of, seeing that take place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we said 5 years, because we know it would be a process to get folks on board. And I think people also, I'm a strong believer in, like, sometimes you have to really see these systems and these institutions inherently fail people in ways that really gets the public to pay more attention. And so, unfortunately, some of these reforms may be adopted. Some of them, unfortunately, will not. and we will see the continued issues at some level with our elections. And I believe that as people continue to see the frustration, the will, and the momentum, and the political capital that is needed to implement online voting and some of those other more innovative reforms and forward-thinking reforms will be there. I think at the moment, there's still some level of convincing that we would have to do on both sides, that online voting is the way that we would need to move forward with as far as our elections are concerned. But in addition to that, things that the commissioners could be doing right now without state involvement or state action is taking a vote, a resolution, and making it clear that as a county, at the county level, that is something that we desire to see statewide. And if Fulton County does it, the city of Atlanta, city council can also pass some sort of similar resolution. DeKalb County can do the same, Cobb, Gwinnett. Again, that builds the capital and the momentum and the political attention that there are areas in our state that want to see us move truly into the 21st century as it pertains to our elections as it's concerned. And I also think it's Fulton County investing in the initial infrastructure to beta test what online voting looks like. Right now, it may not be online voting for a particular election. But for example, there's $23 million that's on the table right now because we were successful in being able to pressure the commissioners to kill a proposal to expand the Fulton County Jail with $23 million in COVID relief money. Now that money is available for us to repurpose in different ways. One of those ways could be through a participatory budgeting process that allows the citizenry to express how they want to see that money spent through some sort of voting process. And so that's a way where we could start doing some online voting to, work out the kinks before we actually take it to voting for elected officials and, other ballot initiatives that may be on the ballot when people are going to go vote. And so there are ways that we could be experimenting and testing online voting today that would get us ready to be able to do that in a more robust way within the next 4 to 5 years.
That's brilliant. Ms. Keisha Waits, I have seen you as a mover and shaker in the Georgia House, and I've been just so impressed with you since the first time I ever met you. And I know that this is the first leg of your journey. You've got so much more to do, so much more to offer, and I can't wait to see what that is. I just want to thank you for your service, for your persistence, and what you're doing by seeing this through is helping someone else, and not just yourself, but other people are going to see this and then know what to do this next time around, or when that happens to them. Thank you for being a voice for the people, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. Devin, I have seen you, I think when I first moved here, not long after I moved here, there was a situation with a young man named Brandon White, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
over in the Pittsburgh area. And I met this little guy, and he was just so fired up about, getting this right and making right about this injustice that had been done. And I'm like, who is this little fella? And I have followed you since that very first day, and I've always been so impressed with you. And I just know that you, sir, are going to be one of our great leaders.
Thank you.
It's going to be you're already amazing, but your future is bright as the sun, man. And I'm proud to know you.
I'm proud to know you, and I'm proud to have your support. Thank you.
Absolutely. The both of you, I'm just so very grateful. And thank you both for coming and sharing with me tonight.
Absolutely.
Tell people where they can find you and communicate with you, Devin, first? If you'd like
Yeah, so I hide in public, so it's not hard to find me,
He
but
is not hard to
it
find.
is not hard to find me. But to connect with me on social media, it's just my name, Devin Barrington Ward, on all platforms. That's Twitter, that's Facebook, Instagram, and you can also visit my website for my company because I'm not a candidate, so now I'm back managing my company, the Black Futurist Group, and that's blackfuturistgroup.com, where I serve as the managing director, and our team, our small but amazing team of 4 that will be expanding by the end of the summer due to some new grant opportunities that we've had. And so we're really excited to be supporting our work with Drug Policy Alliance to support progressive drug policy reform efforts as it pertains to cannabis here in the state of Georgia. We're really fortunate to have financial support from them, along with continuing our work around criminal justice reform with Solutions Not Punishment Collaborative. And if you go on our website, you can find out our demands around the defunding and dismantling of the Atlanta Police Department and going through a process of how we reimagine public safety in the city of Atlanta and beyond, and how we can be a model and really achieve that Mecca status that Atlanta loves to call ourselves. But what is a Black Mecca that can't keep Black people safe? So we have work to do.
Thank you so much, man. Ms. Keisha, same with you. Where can people find you, and how can we support you and help you in your next efforts?
Sure. Well, I'm not going anywhere, and you've already indicated that I've been around for a long time. And so certainly KeishaWaits.com, it lists my email address as well as my contact number. And I'm always accessible as you can speak to. I want to echo a point that was brought up earlier today, and that was online voting mechanisms. There are currently 25 states that are already doing this through an online portal as well as an email portal. So certainly this is being done around the country. And as Mr. Ward indicated, that it certainly takes the willpower to do it.
Indeed, indeed. Well, again, thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
I'm so very grateful. I appreciate your presence. Once again, this is No Better with Kipper Jones. You have been watching a singer, songwriter, entertainer, activist, educator live his dream. Thank you so very much for sharing your time with me tonight, with our guest tonight. Thank you to Status Network, and thank you to David for sharing me with the world. I want to thank my mother who's watching tonight. So thank you so very much for allowing me to be. I'm very grateful. And I would just like to say that the reason why we call the show No Better is because I heard a woman named Maya Angelou say, do the best you can until you know better.
Yes.
And then when you know better, do better.
Yes.
God bless you. God keep you is my prayer.
Okay.
Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Till next time.
Good night.
Good night.
The views and opinions expressed on No Better are those of its host and guest and do not reflect those of the Status Network or any of its affiliates.